Welcome to Unpacking the Athlete podcast, hosted by yours truly, Rob Martin. Welcome to Unpacking the Athlete, a podcast dedicated to diving deep into what makes athletes who they are. Today's guest loves the longer endurance bike races, the ones that are at least 100 miles of mountain biking or gravel. And if there are more miles, he's down. Here's a short list of his accomplishments, and I may pronounce some of these wrong. This year, he won the Southeast Gravel Race to Valhalla and also the Kohuta 100. He is a three-time national ultra endurance mountain bike series champion. He has a top 10 finish at Unbound, a top 3 in the Belgium Waffle Ride Triple Crown, and he's also won the Lumberjack 100 in the past, as well as other big races. He also is a cycling coach and has a great YouTube channel that you should follow if you're not already doing so. Our guest today is Dylan Johnson, who resides in North Carolina. Welcome, Dylan. I can't wait to get this conversation going.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to start with a couple of funny questions, and then we'll get serious.
All right, let's do it.
If you could pick only one discipline to race, mountain bike or gravel, what would you choose and why?
That's a good one. And I feel like the two disciplines are being blurred a little bit. So there's some races where it actually may be questionable whether the faster bike is a mountain bike or a gravel bike. I just talked about this in my recent video about the Leadville 100, where there's only 2 miles of single track in a 100-mile mountain bike race.
So you'd think that, okay, maybe a gravel bike is faster because like the whole thing is gravel roads, but it is actually quite rough, and I think a mountain bike is faster. But as far as categories of racing, doing only mountain bike racing or doing only gravel racing, the younger me is going to hate this answer, but I think gravel racing. I think I go with gravel racing because I used to be exclusively mountain bike.
Right. And I remember that from the past. And that answer surprises me, although you've been doing, I think, more gravel racing, right?
Yeah, I've been doing quite a bit more gravel racing. And I think the reason I say gravel racing right now is just because the level of competition is higher in gravel racing. There's a lot more media surrounding gravel racing. I have come to really love the tactics involved with gravel racing. So yeah, I'll go with gravel.
Gotcha. If you did the Halloween 125 gravel race, what would you dress up as and why?
I don't even know what the Halloween 125 is, to be honest with you. Is that a Michigan race?
I just made it up based on your answer.
We do the Halloween party thing every year, and it takes me about 2 weeks to figure out what I'm going to be. I feel like I'd go the funny route, some sort of funny costume, maybe that's related to gravel. There was a Halloween cyclocross race last year where Ellen Noble dressed up as the spirit of gravel. I think she had like a ghost costume, but like she had cardboard aero bars on her bike, and then her husband was behind her, because if you get that reference, it's because like the women's fields, the women will often have their fast husband like pacing them, and I thought it was pretty creative. I'd have to come up with something like that, but I can't think of it off the top of my head right now.
I like that description because I see that a lot, actually, the husband pacing the wife in some of these races. Even mountain bike races, I see it. We're going to move forward, and we're going to talk about the Kohuta 100, and I'm wondering if you could walk us through your day before and the prep you went through and the morning of, maybe the start of the race, where you were in the pack, what happened when the pack dwindled down, and anything that stands out during the race, and obviously the finish.
Kohuta 100 and I have a, I guess, long history. Like that's the second 100-mile mountain bike race that I ever did when I was 16. And I didn't finish that year because I crashed and got a concussion. But, but yeah, since then I've come to be very successful at Kohuta. Actually, this year was I think the 5th year in a row that I won Kohuta. If you take out the COVID years when they didn't have the race, but I think they didn't have the race for 2 years in a row. I really like that course. So it starts on a. Did we want to start with the day before
Yeah, just
preparation?
maybe about like your prep going in for the day before and then the morning of and then right into the race.
I just drove up the day before. Usually before these races, like the night before, I'm trying to eat a lot of food, mostly carbohydrates. Like I usually don't eat to the point that I'm full on a normal day, but I definitely try to do that the day before the race. So I think we had some sort of high carbohydrate dinner and got a decent night's sleep, although decent is relative because these races start so early in the morning and you have to wake up super early.
Right.
But usually my go-to breakfast before a race is oatmeal. Try to do it 3 hours before the race so that the stomach has time to settle it. Get to the race. I don't do any sort of warm-up before a 100-mile race because you're already going to be out there for 6 to 7, 8+ hours, right? And I'm trying to preserve all the glycogen that I can. Kohuta can have a pretty fast start, which makes not doing a warm up risky. Like that road, there's a road climb right at the beginning, but it didn't. The pace on the road climb up into the single track. I think it's about maybe 3 or 4 miles of road before you hit the single track. It didn't seem that bad this year. In fact, I was leading up most of it. I think got into the single track first. For anyone who's done Kohuta before, you know that there's, I don't know, 25 ish miles of single track at the beginning. And then you get into the long, it's basically gravel for the entire race until you get back to the single track. And then there's about 10 miles of single track at the end. So I got into the single track first, pushed the pace to try to dwindle the field down, got the field down to, I think, just two other riders by the time we hit the gravel, and it was Brian Schwarm and one of Brian Schwarm's teammates that I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head. But at that point, the three of us were working together, and I think it was probably maybe 40 miles in that I didn't attack, but I just rode at a solid pace up a climb, and they couldn't hold the wheel. So it was actually the longest solo that I've ever been at Kohuta. Like usually I'm only solo for the last 20 miles, but this race I was solo for the last 60.
Okay.
So, and I do remember that race was it. Those late spring races are always a little tricky because they're often the first hot races of the year when you're not heat acclimated yet. And I do remember that towards the end of that race, it was probably pushing towards 80 degrees, and I had not been riding in 80 degrees, and it was I did feel like the heat was getting to me, but I had enough of a gap that it wasn't a big issue, and I got into the single track and still felt decent, and yeah, came away with the win there.
So maybe a little hyperthermic toward the end.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned oatmeal, and I know personally I've tried
Mhm.
oatmeal, and for some reason my stomach doesn't digest it. It just feels like it sits in there. So I know a few other people that use oatmeal pre-race, and I wish I
Mhm.
could because I think it lasts a little longer for you, especially on the longer races, but
Mhm.
I'm just not able to do it.
Yeah, I know plenty of people that aren't able to do oatmeal. I mean, I eat oatmeal pretty much every morning, so maybe my body's just gotten used to it at this point. But
Right?
yeah,
Can you also maybe walk us through the your top 10 Unbound finish and tell us a little bit about that and how it went?
sure. I got ninth place at Unbound in 20, I think it was 2018. The competition since has only gotten fiercer every single year. And so I've done Unbound 3 times. And what's interesting is that my best placing was the first Unbound I did in 2018. And that's my worst finishing time. So my finishing times have only gotten faster and my placings have only gotten worse. Just kind of goes to show you how that race has blown up. But yeah, I mean, 2018, the competition was still very fierce. I mean, Ted King won it that year. I come from 100-mile mountain bike racing, and I was thinking, it takes 7 hours, 8 hours to finish a 100-mile mountain bike race. This is probably going to be 10 or 11. I mean, how much harder is that? That's like 2 or 3 extra hours. It was a lot harder. I don't know if I was quite mentally or physically prepared, to be honest with you. I was riding with the front group decently for the first 120 miles or so, and then Ted King and the rider that got second place that day went off the front, and I decided to go with them, but their pace was much too high for me. And I tried to stay with them for probably 20 minutes before I got dropped. And then after that point, I was in a very dark place for probably 50 or so miles. Like I was cramping, I was bonking, all the bad things. There was a point at which I stopped on the side of the road for 10 or 15 minutes. Like there was a farmer who had a cooler of water, but somehow I was still in the top 10 at this point. So I didn't want to quit the race when you're still in the top 10. And I think about mile 170, I started to catch a second wind and start to feel better. And then a group caught me. And so this group probably had 5 riders. So the best that I could do was 9th place if I beat everyone in this group. And then obviously the worst I could do is I could get like 14th place, which is quite a big difference, right? 9th to 14th.
Yeah.
Have it, and it's one group. So essentially just losing the sprint out of this group, it means that you've dropped 5 places. I never consider myself much of a sprinter. And especially back in 2018, sprinting is something that I never worked on, but I guess I had more juice in my legs than the rest of this group because I won the sprint out of that group to get 9th.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Especially with everything you were dealing with there.
Yeah, well, the thing about Unbound is that I feel like after Unbound, everybody's got some sort of horror story about how their race went, whether it be flat tires or other mechanicals, or they cramped or they bonked or whatever it is. And I think the thing that you got to realize is that that's part of the race. Everybody, like no one has a clean race at Unbound, right? And if you have a clean race at Unbound, you're part of you're part of probably the 3% of people that did.
Yeah.
Like it's very rare that nothing goes wrong at Unbound. It's just part of the race.
Yeah. You just have to push through. It's funny because when I look at some of the other endurance races and afterwards you talk with people and they're like, oh yeah, I had cramps, so I dropped out at the second aid station, or I had a flat tire and I just was like, okay, whatever, I'm done. But sometimes I think it's good to have some toughness in the race that you have to push through. It just makes you tougher for the next race.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big proponent of trying to get to the finish line even when the race is going horribly, and not just dropping out, because I think you're going to feel a lot better about that race even if the race didn't go your way. It feels better to say you finished the race than to say you didn't finish the race. And like you said, I mean, it makes you tougher for the next race if you get through it. So
absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
I did the Prescott 50 this year, the Whiskey 50.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, so here in Michigan, we had cold spring, 40 degrees, 45 degrees. And then you head out, head out to Prescott and it was like 80, 85 degrees. And I totally bonked. I was so overheated. So, yeah, but I slowed it down. Every aid station put water over my head and just kept, the slow pace, but crossed the finish line. So I agree. I'm glad that I finished instead of pulling out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the heat acclimation, I feel like every time people go to an altitude race, they talk about the altitude acclimation. I think that heat acclimation is just as important for a hot race as altitude acclimation is for an altitude race. It makes such a difference. And if you've been riding in, northern winter conditions, all winter, and then that first hot race of the spring, people are just dropping out right and left. They're not ready for it.
No, I was totally blown up, man. I still can't believe I was able to finish, but yeah, that's a whole nother story. I'd also like to hear about your Leadville 100 race this year.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe tell us a little bit about how that was.
It was the first year that I did Leadville. And I mean, obviously, being a 100-mile mountain bike racer, I'd heard plenty about it. I've thought about doing it. It just seemed like it was a lot of hassle to do it. And what I mean by that is the entry fee is expensive, and being out in Colorado is expensive. And you have to, if you want to do well, you have to be out there for a long time to acclimate. And when I feel like every single year when I weighed the pros and cons of doing it, I found more cons because it was just too much of a headache to try to figure out how to do it. But this year it was part of the Lifetime Grand Prix, which I'm a part of, which for those who don't know is like a 6-race series, 3 mountain bike races and 3 gravel races. One of those is Unbound. I kind of went all in with the acclimation. I went out a month early. I stayed in a couple different places around Colorado to stair step the altitude. I didn't just go straight to 10,000 feet. I started at 6,000 and gradually went up. So I felt like I was well acclimated. I felt like my training leading into the race was good. I mean, obviously, while I was at altitude, I wasn't putting out the same power numbers, and I don't really have a lot of experience with what my training numbers should look like at altitude, but it seemed like it was decent. So I was happy with my preparation. And then on race day, I know that at altitude, it's much easier to blow up than when you're down at sea level. So kind of did this tactic where I just, I let myself get dropped on the first climb. I could stay with the front group, but if I do that, I'm going to pay for it later. I ended up paying for it later anyway, just even at the pace I was going. But I kind of just rode my own pace, and there were a lot of fast roadies in the race too that I knew lacked technical skills. So in like the flat sections where it was helpful to draft, I got in with some fast roadies who got dropped on the downhill right before. So it kind of worked out perfectly. Like I was in a group with Rob Britton and Nikki Terpstra. The last 2 hours of the race, I faded quite badly. Perhaps I could have maybe been even more conservative with my pacing, or perhaps I went a little too hard up Columbine. Columbine is the massive climb in the middle of the race that takes you to the halfway point. Maybe I went a little too hard up Columbine, but overall, I think the race went well. I finished in 6 hours, 45 minutes and got 20th place, which, I mean, that time of 6 hours, 45, pretty much any other year, that would have been a top 10. And, the only reason it wasn't a top 10 this year is because won the Lifetime Series. And then the Lifetime Series also seems to be attracting really fast racers outside of the series. So the competition was just through the roof this year.
I saw the start list, so I saw that there was a lot of talent there at that race this year.
Yeah, to say the least.
To say the least. Did you stay? I don't know. So when you went to Colorado and you spent the time out there, did you stay maybe at 6,000 feet and then go down a little lower and train and then gradually move up and kind of stair step like that? Or did you just stay at 6,000, train at 6,000, move up to maybe 7 and train there and gradually work your way up that way?
The place that I was physically staying was always going up. So I stayed at 6,000, then 7,000, then 9,000, then 10,000. So where I was sleeping and, staying was always getting higher. But there were times when I tried to get in a high intensity workout at lower altitude. Like I drove down to lower altitude to try to do a high intensity workout. Hopefully that helped a little bit.
Gotcha.
It's interesting because probably the best way to train for altitude is to live high, train low, which is the opposite of what most people do. Like most people live in the valley at low altitude and then they go into the mountains to train. And the research on that method, which I guess would be called live low, train high, I've never seen a review article say this, but their conclusion, they said there's no need for further study on live low, train high, because there's that little evidence that it works. It's rather inconvenient to do it the right way, but it's probably worth it.
Yeah. Let's rewind. When did you get started on the bike and how did that happen?
My dad mountain biked, and I think he got me a mountain bike for my birthday or something when I was 12. And then he started taking me mountain biking with him. And I think I did my first race when I was either 13 or 14. And probably around 15 or 16 is when I started getting more serious about it. At
Okay.
15, I did my first 100-mile mountain bike race, which was the Shenandoah 100, which I loved. I think I liked that style of racing a little bit more than cross country racing. Cross country racing was obviously the first kind of racing that I did,
Yeah.
because I don't know, a 13-year-old kid is not gonna, their first race is probably not gonna be a 100-mile race. I would hope not.
No, right.
But I like that kind of racing. There was a brief period of time where I was focusing on cross country racing and trying to be a cross country racer, like around 17, 18 years old. But I think I realized that my strengths are more in endurance racing. And then throughout my early 20s, I was just focused on 100-mile mountain biking and other endurance racing. I got into gravel when it started blowing up 2018, 2019. So, and the thing I like about gravel is that they really embraced long distance racing. Like gravel could have very easily just been 40-mile races on gravel,
Yeah.
like kind of what road racing looks like. I mean, road racing at the pro level is very long, but I mean, road racing at, the national level, it's just, it's a 2 or 3 hour race on the road. Gravel
Yeah.
could have very easily been that, but gravel seems to have embraced these super long distance races. Like the biggest gravel race in the world is 200 miles long. It was kind of natural that I would progress in that direction.
Can you take us back to the tour of Tucker County?
Tour of Tucker County. That was so long ago. Were you
Yeah.
there?
No, I just found it and I saw that you did it, so I wanted to hear about it.
How old was I? I don't even know how old I was. What, 16, 17?
Maybe. I think so, right in there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was about
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Tour of Tucker County was I think it's the only road race I've ever won. And there's a reason for that. It's because that race didn't come down to a sprint finish. I haven't done a lot of road racing since I was a junior, and I think I would be better at it now because I have a better sprint and I know race tactics better. But back when I was a junior, I was like 115 pounds. So obviously, and my sprint was horrible, and I didn't know how to set myself up for the sprint, and I didn't know tactics. So if I did a crit, I just got smashed. But Tour of Tucker County is an interesting race in that you kind of do, I think, a lap or two at the bottom, and it's like rolling terrain. It's a bit of climbing, but it's not anything crazy. And then you do this, I want to say 20 or 30-minute climb to finish the race, and it's a summit finish at the top.
Oh,
And so that's basically the reason I won the race, is because when it's a summit finish like that, you don't have to sprint against anyone. So
you just have to grind it out.
yeah, yeah, and
Nice.
I was probably, I mean, the group of riders that got to the bottom of the climb, I was racing against adults. I wasn't doing the junior race. I mean, I was probably the lightest person in that group of 10 riders by 30 or 40 pounds.
That helps a lot.
So, yeah.
The tour of Tucker County. Look at that. What other sports or activities have you done in the past that maybe helped you be better on the bike?
In high school, I ran cross country, which I really liked. And obviously, that running is an endurance sport, so I think it helped with that. I don't think I'm as good at, just physiologically, I don't think I'm as good at running as I am at cycling. The main reason for that is because I don't have a good running stride. Like, I'm a massive heel striker.
Okay.
And so my running stride is quite inefficient, even if I have a good aerobic system. So I did okay in cross country. I wasn't at the level that I was getting any sort of like college scholarship or anything, but I had fun doing that. And then from late high school into college, I was pretty much solely focused on mountain biking. I did a little bit of skiing growing up, but but yeah, other than that, I've been pretty focused on cycling from a young age.
Yeah, the cross country definitely translated for sure. That probably got you
Mhm.
started in with the endurance events, and then you just built on it from there.
Yeah. I also have difficulty overtraining with running. And I mean like I was injuring myself.
Okay.
So for example, at the end of cross country, I remember like I was 16 years old in high school. At the end of every cross country season, I was walking around high school like I was an old man. Like my knees hurt so bad that I remember it got to the point at the end of the cross country seasons that I would have to warm up for half an hour of easy running before my knees even felt good enough to run at a normal pace. I don't, I don't know. Maybe the coaching wasn't great, and maybe I could build myself up to the point where that wasn't an issue now. But I feel like there was just a point where if I was running a sufficient amount, my knees were going to give out.
Wow. Wow. Maybe it's from all the heel striking, maybe not
Yeah,
running on the toes.
not only is heel striking not efficient, but it's also bad for your knees, right? So
Yeah.
if I were to I run a little bit in the off season now, and I don't worry too much about my stride because I'm not trying to go fast. But if I was trying to be any sort of runner now, I would probably try to fix that running stride and not be so much of a heel striker, which would be hard for me because that's naturally what I want to do. But you know, I think in order to have any sort of longevity in running, I would have to learn how to do that.
Agreed. Heel striking is no good,
Hmm.
especially in endurance. The longer you go,
Yeah,
the more strikes you're getting. Ah,
yeah,
you
definitely.
telling me that just hurts my knees. What was the best investment that maybe you made in yourself, or a parent, family member, or friend that was the most helpful to you along the way to get you to where you are today?
I think this is probably an easy question for me. I think starting my YouTube channel completely changed the course of my career. I mean, I don't know, as far as my professional cycling career, it may have made me a better cyclist just because I had to do all this research for my YouTube channel. But I mean, as far as my coaching career goes, it was like a night and day difference after I started the YouTube channel. So I started working for CTS right out of college, which is a coaching company, and I was an independent contractor, and they would provide me with athletes. And when they hired me, they kind of made it sound like, oh yeah, we'll provide you with enough athletes that you can make your full time living off of doing this. And there were a bunch of coaches that were making their full time living off of being independent contractor coaches for CTS. So, but I mean, I like that first year, I only had, I don't know, 5 athletes, maybe. I mean, I remember the first summer that I graduated college, I only had 5 athletes, which is like roughly $500 a month. And I was living in like a 1 bedroom duplex with 2 other guys. So there's 3 dudes in a 1 bedroom, and rent was like, I don't know, $212 for me, like my part of the rent. And I would go to NUE races and bank on the hope that I would do well in the race so that I could take the prize money from the race and use it for my groceries like the next month. There was like $500 to $1,000 for the win at those races at that time. And I'd go to a race, I'd get $1,000, and I'm like, perfect. I've got enough money for groceries for the next couple of months. So it was like there was a while where I was just like, I don't know, this is not, I need to do something here. So I was a fan of YouTube. I mean, I've watched YouTube since I was a kid. And I kind of noticed that it seemed like in other spaces, like, for example, general fitness or nutrition, there are these channels where it's very science based, like science based nutrition channels, science based fitness channels. And it seemed like that was missing from the cycling space. And I have a background in exercise science, and I learned how to do research in college, and that's kind of how I think in general. So I decided to go down that route and fill that niche. And I think how quickly the channel grew was just a sign that that was really a YouTube niche that needed to be filled.
Yeah.
I hear stories of YouTubers talking about how it took them a long time to get any sort of audience, and I was fortunate that the audience actually came pretty quickly.
Yeah, you filled that niche. And so that's helped you out immensely. You're saying get more clients and with your cycling because you were able to learn along the way too.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean the YouTube channel just kind of acts as advertisement for my coaching, and it's the best kind of advertisement because those videos are genuine. It's not people watch those videos and it doesn't seem like you're watching an ad, and in a
Right.
sense it's not really an ad, it's a genuine video. Then they're like, "Oh, I liked what that guy had to say about this topic or that topic. Let me check out his coaching." And it grew enough from there that I didn't even need to work for CTS anymore because CTS takes a cut.
Yep.
So really the reason why you would work for CTS in the first place is so that they can do all the marketing for you, and you have to, you just worry about the coaching, and then they're going to take a cut, but that's kind of the trade-off. But if you're big, if enough people know who you are that you don't need a company to do the marketing for you to bring the clients to you, there's in my mind there's not really a lot of benefit to working for a company like CTS. So I
No.
just kind of I left and I started my own company.
I think that's a win.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I heard
Yep.
about your YouTube channel because someone else told me, you got to listen to this guy. So, ever since then, but still since then, people are like, hey, do you listen to Dylan Johnson? Hey, do you listen to Dylan Johnson? I hear it all the time. Yeah, I do because you got good stuff. So, I mean, word of mouth travels fast. And I think that also is another reason why you've grown so fast because you put out good content. People like it. People tell their friends.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Appreciate it.
Did anyone influence you to get on the bike other than your dad?
I mean, originally I think the only reason why I even started riding a mountain bike was because of my dad. But then once I was into cycling, I mean, I'm trying to remember the big pros that were probably influential to me when I was in my teen years was like Todd Wells, Jeremiah Bishop, Adam Craig. They were kind of all in their prime when I was a teenager. And then, Jeremiah Bishop he lives in Virginia. I grew up in Virginia. I kind of grew up going to races where he was dominating, like the local races. Like, for example, the Shenandoah 100. I'm pretty sure the first year that I did it when I was 15, he was the one who won that race that year. He still holds the course record to this day, I think, from 2015 or something.
Yeah, it's 2015.
Yeah. So we're, and now we're friends and we still race together, and he's slowing down a little bit and I'm speeding up, but yeah, it's kind of been cool to see.
It's even cooler that you get to race with him, when you have someone that
Mhm.
you've looked up to and now you're racing. You've been racing with him, you've done races with him, and maybe now you're a little faster than him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a cool thing.
I know you mentioned maybe a first bike race, but do you remember what your first bike race was? And are you able to
Mhm.
reminisce on that a little bit?
The closest trail system to my house where I grew up in Virginia was Wakefield Park, and it's right off of the DC Beltway. There's a limited amount of trails, like there's probably 10 or 15 miles of trail total. And when you're riding there, you can hear cars on the highway. But at the time it was like that was what I knew mountain biking was, and I really liked that trail system. And I probably, as a kid, there was no trail system that I rode at more than Wakefield. And they had a race series there in the summer that was on Wednesdays, and it was just called Wednesdays at Wakefield. I think they still have it. And yeah, I think it was just the junior race at the Wednesdays at Wakefield. And I think I did win my first race.
Nice.
That being said, I mean, it was a junior race at a Wednesdays at Wakefield, so the competition probably wasn't crazy or anything, but yeah.
That's still pretty cool to win your first ever race. Not everybody
Yeah.
can. Not everybody can say that. Since you're an ultra endurance guy, your training's probably a little different than people that do XC, obviously. And
Mhm.
maybe could you tell us during the end of your base building period, how many hours are you putting on the bike a week?
This year was a little bit less than normal just because I was trying to experiment with doing less volume because I've been such a volume heavy guy for a couple of years now. And I'll be honest, I don't know how well it worked. I think I'm going to go back to high volume next year. What do I mean by high volume? I mean at the end of my, like, for example, the year before in 2021, towards the end of my base season, I had quite a few 30 hour weeks, 30 plus hour weeks on the bike. I think there was one build where I did 2 30 hour weeks in a row back to back. And I mean, I just enjoy riding my bike and I don't mind. And I've got the time to do 30 hours a week on the bike. I know a lot of people that's like, that sounds like a whole nother job. And it is a whole nother job, right? But I don't mind riding my bike 30 hours a week. I think it just becomes, it's just very tricky to balance riding your bike that much with proper recovery. Proper recovery becomes so important, and it's so easy to slip off the edge of the cliff into overtraining when you're physically training that much.
Yeah.
And I've done it. I've done it plenty of times where I've had to take some time off, or I've had to do multiple easy weeks in a row to get back out of the hole of overtraining because I overdid it a little bit too much. So
And
it's a fine line.
what for you is overtraining? How can you tell in your own body?
I've done videos about this actually because it's a question that I get quite frequently, and I think it's, if you're an endurance athlete, it's something that you're always wrestling with, is how much training is too much and how much training is too little. The things that you need to look out for are sometimes motivation is the first to go. So if you're generally, now some people they just struggle with motivation in general, and that's a separate issue. But let's say that you're generally a highly motivated athlete and you're always excited to get on the bike and train, and you don't generally struggle with motivation. If you've been training a lot and then all of a sudden your motivation to train is dropped, that may not be as much of a psychological issue as you think. It may actually be more of you're physically overtrained, and you lacking motivation is your body telling you that you need to chill and you need to rest. So motivation can be big, sleep quality, appetite. It's kind of like depression, right? It affects people differently. So some people start eating too much, some people start eating less, some people start sleeping more, some people can't sleep. It's a little eerie how similar the symptoms of overtraining are to the symptoms of depression. There's also, like, changes in mood and irritability and all of that. And when you're physically on the bike, it's easier to tell. So signs to look for when you're physically on the bike is you can't get your heart rate up. Like, your heart rate is just in a constant depressed state, and let's say you typically do your threshold intervals at 170 beats per minute, but you can't even, you're going as hard as you can and you can't even get them over 160 beats per minute. That's probably a sign that it's not necessarily a sign that you're reached the point of overtraining, but it's definitely a sign that you're probably too tired to do those threshold intervals. If you're experiencing that on a constant basis, then you probably are overtrained. And then also, if you feel like you've just lost your snap and you feel like, moving the pedals is it's like a drag to even get the pedals moving, and you have this constant lingering fatigue that never goes away, and it's like every single day that you get on the bike, it's like that. It's okay to be tired on the bike on a semi-frequent basis, but you should have days in the week where you feel quite good. And those should be the days after the rest days when you do your intervals. And if there are no days in the week where you feel good, you're probably overtrained.
That all makes sense. I've been through some of those too. And for me, I notice the irritability. I get real irritable, just
Mm-hmm.
a little grumpy. So, and when I get there, it's okay. I need to take a few extra days off. And then at the end of those, I'll just come back with maybe a day or two of active recovery rides. And then I start feeling better and I'm not irritable and my body feels better and the snappiness comes back. So,
yeah, definitely.
What has been your most memorable race on the bike?
When I was telling you about my first Unbound, that's quite a memorable experience because of how difficult that race was to even finish. And then when I finished the race, I mean, I've done Unbound 3 times at this point, and I still haven't been able to break the top 10 after that first time. So the result was good. And it was most of the time when you get a good result, it's you had a good day, like you felt good on the bike to get that good result. But I mean, there were so many struggles in that race, and I thought about quitting so much, and I think those are the more memorable races than even probably the races that go perfectly
Yeah.
smoothly. And I think that it also helps that not only was that a tough race to get through, but it also actually ended up being a good result as well.
And then on that same note, other than a race, have you done any long group rides or adventure rides that were pretty memorable? Because I know I've had some of those, and it touches on those points that you just said. There was some difficulty in those and struggles, and those kind of adventure rides seem to be the most memorable for me. So I'm just kind of wondering if
Mm-hmm.
you have anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of those from when I was a teenager, and I mean, I still do long rides. Although I don't know, I seem to do less of the just go out and adventure type rides. I should do more of it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I remember plenty of rides where we'd go out for 7+ hours, and we'd probably get a couple flat tires along the way, and somebody would bonk, and we'd have to stop at a gas station and get some food. And um, I mean, I can remember rides where I was solo, where I was probably 30 miles away from my house, and I bonked,
Yeah.
and I just I was like barely able to make it home, and I was probably 16 years old. So I don't know. I did a lot more of that craziness when I was like 16, 17. And to be honest, it was probably not a good thing for my
Right.
development. Like
Right.
I was the kid in high school who looked like they should be in middle school.
Okay. Well, that
You
was
know what
me
I mean?
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. I was
Yeah.
4'10" as a freshman.
Yeah. I think I was maybe 5 foot. So
Okay, we were pretty similar then.
yeah.
We had one of these adventure rides during the world shutdown, and it was a long one like you were talking about, and there was 4 of us. And one of the
Mhm.
guys I actually brought a towie. Do you know what the towie is?
I don't know.
It's like a bungee that you can connect from your bike seat to the bike behind you to kind of help. It's meant for kids,
Hmm.
but because this was
Okay.
such a long ride, I thought, well, maybe someone might bonk. I think we were only about 15 miles from our destination. One of the guys just couldn't go any further. He starts the dry heavey. So we go to
Mhm.
this campground. I tell him I got the towie. He doesn't want to use the towie. And we ended up just leaving him there because he wouldn't go with us. And so he had to call his wife to come pick him up, which was probably like an hour and a half away from where they lived. And that was so
Wow.
that's kind of like one of the memorable ones that we did. And it just makes me laugh still to today that he wouldn't let me pull him with the towie because we only
Yeah.
had,
That's the whole reason you brought it, right?
yeah. So I don't know. That's just a funny one that sticks out in my head because we've all had
Yeah,
those days. Just take the help, man.
for sure.
Why do you love the sport and what keeps you going?
As far as sports go, endurance sports take a lot of, I think they take a lot of mental toughness, and kind of when you get down to it, endurance sports are about kind of like how much pain can you deal with,
Hmm.
and both in training and in racing, right? You
Yep.
need to go through pain in training in order to make yourself faster, and then in the actual race itself, you need to deal with pain in order to go faster and beat your competition. And I don't know, I think at this point, in in my life and in a lot of, in first world countries, like, we live such a comfortable life that maybe people lose touch with that. And it's kind of a cool thing to simulate that in sports. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be cycling or even endurance sports, but I think it's a cool aspect, just kind of like simulating struggle in your own life, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And I think you can do that, like you said, with other things. You can go to the weight room and
Sure. Yeah.
push the weight, right?
Hmm.
Which brings up my
Yeah,
next
definitely.
question. Do you do any kind of strength training?
Yeah, I'm huge on strength training. I've got 4 or 5 videos about strength training on my channel. And if you look at I guess strength training is still somewhat of a controversial topic amongst both coaches and athletes in cycling. Some riders do it, some riders don't do it, some coaches recommend it, some coaches don't recommend it. But if you look at the science on how strength training affects cycling performance, it's not controversial. It improves cycling performance. And a lot of people, I hear a lot of people talk too about, like, oh, well, it may not necessarily improve your power per se, but it's good for, bone density and general health and whatever. I'm like, all right, all of that is good, but it actually does improve your power. Like, there's research on this, and it's not so much I'm so used to doing research on these topics, and so often there's one study that says this and there's one study that says that, and you have to kind of parse these studies out and see where the balance of evidence lies. It's almost every single study on how weight training affects cycling performance shows that it improves cycling performance. And it's not just for sprinting. It's also for, lactate threshold and 40K and 5-minute power and all of that. Like, it's just generally improves cycling performance. So I'm big on it, and I have my athletes do it. So yeah, 100%.
Squats equal watts. That's
Yep.
what I like to tell people.
Yeah.
Some people still don't
Yeah,
agree with
definitely.
me, but I tell them that they do.
You should send them my video if you run into somebody that doesn't agree.
Yeah, I think I will from now on, because I think I've seen that
Yep.
one. So another thing with your videos, because I have a background, I have a 4-year degree and I'm certified strength conditioning specialist. So I've
Hmm.
done all this same kind of stuff. When I see your videos, a lot of times what they do is they just solidify my beliefs. With the strength training, I mean, I've tested it on myself. I've gone and I've taken it out and gone 3-4 months without it. And I
Hmm.
just feel like my cycling gradually goes down. And then
Hmm.
I've used, personally, I like to go with lower reps, higher weight. I just think that
Yeah.
that's the biggest bang for your buck personally. And so, I mean, like I said, I tell people that, and I tell them squats equal watts, and some people, will do it, and then they'll see that it does, and then other people are still like, no, you're crazy, man. How you lifting while you're still racing? I might take
Uh-huh.
the week
Right.
off before a race and not lift, but
Hmm.
I'm still lifting around, most of the time. So I don't know. Do you do strength training during the week before a race, or will you take a week or two off before?
It kind of depends on the athlete as to whether I suggest lifting all year round or taking some time off in the season. There are athletes that their season is just too, like, they're literally racing every weekend. And at that
Yeah.
point, it's like you can't fit the lifting in. A lot of pro cyclists are like this,
Yep.
where they literally have a race every single weekend, and you're like, I don't even know where I can possibly fit this lifting session in.
Yeah.
And I guess the difficulty is that if you have a block of racing that is 2 months long, and then you get back in the gym, I mean, you're going to be useless that whole week, right? Because you
Yeah,
haven't lifted for 2 months.
exactly.
So I try to have most people lift year round, but there are some people that it just doesn't work in their schedule, and it really is more of a thing that we work on in the fall, winter, and the spring, and then in the summer when their season is, it's like it just doesn't fit.
Yeah. Not enough time for recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just adding more stress. That makes sense. I'm guessing that you spend most of your training time outdoors, right? You don't spend a lot of time indoor on a
Yeah.
trainer?
Yeah, well, I live in North Carolina, and I live in the mountains. I think on the coast, it probably is good enough weather that you could actually feasibly ride in comfortable weather year round. But here in the mountains, we'll get some bad snows in the winter. But I'm the kind of rider that I would rather bundle up and go out and ride in 20-degree weather than ride on the trainer.
Yeah.
And for you in Michigan, 20 degrees probably sounds like a warm winter day, but
It
that's about
is.
as cold as that's about as cold as it gets down here. So
Gotcha. Have you heard of the Polar Roll? It's a fat bike race up in the UP.
I have not.
So the last couple of years, the temperatures have been well below zero, and
Mhm.
it's quite a brutal race. If you were ever interested in trying out fat biking,
There's not nearly enough snow down here in North Carolina to justify buying a fat bike. But if I lived up there, I mean, like I just said, I'd rather go out in the cold than ride on the trainer. So I would probably be a regular fat biker if I lived up in Michigan.
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
For recovery, what do you like to do for recovery? Devices or any kind of
Yeah,
supplements?
I did have video about various recovery methods. I do, and what's interesting about it is that there are some recovery methods that, while they do speed recovery, they may actually be harmful in the long term because they're hindering adaptation. Like you actually need your body needs this stress in order to make adaptations to it. And I mean, I'll just give you some examples. Like there have been studies that have shown that excessive amounts of vitamin C and vitamin E, like you shouldn't worry about eating an orange after a ride, but I'm talking
Right.
about supplements that have an insane amount of vitamin C and vitamin E. They speed recovery, but by doing that, they actually hinder adaptation, meaning that from that workout that you did, you don't get as strong as you would have had you not taken those massive supplements. There's a little bit of research that might suggest that for ice baths, but it's more so for weightlifting. It seems. I think they have done research on that for endurance sports, and it's inconclusive. I would say that whole question is inconclusive right now with the research on ice baths, but I'll do like the Normatec boots, the compression boots that fill with air. Those seem to be okay from what I find. I think the biggest thing that people need to get more of is sleep. Sleep is I never use an alarm. I if I mean I'll set an alarm before a race, but generally I'm so excited for a race that I don't need it, but I can probably count the number of times on two hands in my entire life that I've woken up to the sound of an alarm. I try to get as much sleep as I possibly can. That ends up being around 8 hours. Like it's hard for me to physically sleep more than 8 hours a day, but I think that's the biggest one.
8 hours is a good number to shoot for. I also have a hard time sleeping past 8 hours, and I don't know why. I mean, even after a brutal day of riding before, still 8 hours,
Yeah.
and then I'm up, and even if I try to go back to sleep, I'm getting back up. If there was one race you could do over, what would it be, and what would you have done differently?
Every race that I don't win. Every race that you don't win, you think about how you could have done something differently to do better in the race, right?
Yep.
It doesn't matter if you got second place or you got 50th place. You think about things that you could have done in the race that would have gotten you a better placing. At least I do.
I do same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the only races where that doesn't happen are the races that you win. Because if you win, that's the best you could have done. I mean, I guess you could have gotten a faster time, but it's like it doesn't really matter that much. Like you were the
Right.
fastest person at the race. So
I don't really win races. I usually just get my teeth kicked in. So I'm always thinking about what I could do better.
sure. I do remember the first year that I won the NUE series. I was 21 years old, and the second to last race in the series was the Shenandoah 100. And I already said that the Shenandoah 100 was the first 100-mile race that I ever did. And it's a hard one to win because the competition is a little bit stiffer at that one. And I was probably one of the favorites to win it that year because I had won 300-mile races leading up to that point. And I was in a great position to win it. I remember that I dropped second place on the second to last climb, and I was feeling great, and I was in the lead, and I bonked on the last climb. Like I ran out of glycogen, and he ended up passing me with probably a mile to go in the race, and he beat me by 2 minutes. So, I mean, I remember, and had I won that race, I would have been able to wrap up the NUE series at that race, and I would have been the winner going into the last race. I wouldn't even have had to do the last race if I didn't want to. I would have still done it, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had to worry about winning the series. But because I got second, I had to do the last race and I had to win the last race, which I ended up doing. But it just made the whole thing more stressful and a lot more pressure on that last race. And I wanted to win Shenandoah because it would have been my first win. I think when I finished that race, I was kicking myself for like a week, and I was just thinking, you should have just fueled more in the second half of that race. You would have been fine. I mean, you were so close to the finish when you
Yeah.
bonked. So yeah.
Good story. And I can see why you want to redo that one. What do you do pre-competition to get yourself ready? Do you do any prep rituals, music?
I'm not one of these racers that has like a pre-race ritual that I have to do. I mean, when I'm driving to the race, I'll put on music that hypes me up, but sometimes I'm already at the race, and if I don't listen to music, it's not a big deal. I don't, yeah, I'm not much of a pre-race ritual guy. I just get my breakfast in and get
And
to the
do it.
starting line.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What other events do you have on the calendar this year?
So there are two more races in the Lifetime Grand Prix. There's Schwamigan, which I think I'm pronouncing right at this point. Enough people have corrected me on it.
Yeah,
I think it's Schwamigan.
I think
But
you're right.
I could still be pronouncing it wrong. I don't know. It's I pronounced it horribly in one of my videos, like Chequamegan or something. So bad. And I heard about it in the comments. There were plenty of people from Wisconsin telling me that I pronounced it wrong. So it's the beauty of YouTube is like when your audience gets to a certain point, if you make one little mistake, like
Oh
you
yeah,
never hear the end of it in the comments. So
it's the best.
so that race is coming up, which that one will be interesting because I believe Cole Patton won it last year, right? And his winning time was 2:15 or something. It's not really an ultra endurance race like the other ones on the calendar. It's kind of an
Shorter.
XC style effort. So I've actually been doing a lot more VO2 max intervals and 30-30s to try to get ready for it. Usually I wouldn't consider a race like that my strong suit. So we'll have to see how that one goes. And then the last race of the Lifetime Grand Prix is Big Sugar, which is a 100-mile gravel race, which
Okay.
I'm looking forward to. I think that one will probably suit me well, hopefully.
And where's Big Sugar?
It's in Arkansas.
Oh, that's right. Okay. And I think Cole's going to be at the Shigwamanon this year as well.
Yeah, I would expect him to, being that he's the defending champion and he's part of the Lifetime Grand Prix. So
Yeah.
He'll
You
definitely
said
be one of the favorites for that race.
I was going to try to go do that one, but we have a wedding that day. So I do want to do that one at least once, though. That was been one on my to-do list or my bucket list. And I just, every year something's on that day for some reason. What trail would you recommend as a must ride? And you can pick one that's anywhere in the world. Your favorite. Must
Anywhere
ride.
in the world.
Yes, must ride.
Must ride anywhere in the world? Oof. I thought you were going to say must ride in my local area. I mean, I'm sure there's so many must rides that I haven't even ridden yet.
Something that you've ridden.
I'll tell you, the must ride in my area is probably Black Mountain from the top to the bottom in Pisgah.
Yep.
Especially after they've redone it. I think it's my favorite trail in Pisgah right now.
Oh.
And I would just say in general it's a must ride, not even like a must ride for the Southeast or whatever. I think just literally it's probably one of my top favorite trails in the whole country that I've ridden.
There's some good views on that trail as well.
Yeah. I rode some amazing trails when I was in Colorado that I would put on that list if I knew what the names of them were.
Okay. Right.
I was riding with a buddy and we just rode them. I don't know. I can't remember any of the names of them. One of them was in A Basin. It was pretty amazing. Very long descent, probably 20, 30 minutes. I've also ridden in Moab, and I guess a lot of those are must rides, like the one that goes Porcupine Rim.
Okay.
That's like the one that everybody talks about. That's like the best descent, and it is very good when you do it from the top. It's like probably the longest descent that I've ever done.
I'll have to put that one on my list. I've done Black Mountain, but I haven't done it since the redos.
Before the redo, it was a lot gnarlier. Like, it was more technical and it was more rugged.
Yep.
Now it's a little bit more groomed and tame, which some people don't like. I like it. I think it flows better and it's more fun.
Okay, I'm gonna have to get back and try that then.
Yeah.
I'm glad I asked you that question. I almost skipped it. I'm gonna take a left turn here and ask if you have any cool guests coming up on your channel, or if you have any must-see episodes with some cool research that you've done coming up on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, so just this year I started getting guests on for videos. I'd never done that before, but I got Josh Portner on from Silka to talk about marginal gains, and those videos did super well.
Those were good videos.
And then I got Steven Seiler on to talk about polarized training. Those videos also did well. I think people just like hearing a different voice instead of hearing my voice all the time.
No, I think it's just they brings a different element into your channel, and I just think it's a good.
Yeah, no, I think they went really well. The next guest that I have lined up is Dr. Jim Taylor.
Okay,
and he's a sports psychologist, so we're gonna go into a little bit more of sports psychology and how people can improve their performance that way. I think the next video that I'll do that's just myself and my own research is I really want to do a video on ketone supplements, because that's been super big in the world tour. And actually GCN just put out a video about ketone supplements, and of course in classic GCN fashion, it was just an advertisement for whatever ketone supplement brand happened to pay them. This video is not going to be paid by any ketone supplement company. I'm just going to be looking at the research objectively, and I'll tell you what I find.
That'll be good. I think more studies or more of those types of things these days, there's always some money behind it or some company behind it that's trying to get their product or whatever out there. Definitely. Why do you love coaching athletes?
From a young age, I've been very interested in kind of, sports physiology and how to. I get a real kick out of this, and I do this both from the from the side of coaching, which is you're working on the motor, which is the athlete, and then the equipment side, which has come out a little bit more in my recent marginal gains videos. Let's take Schwamigan as an example. I get a real kick out of trying to optimize both the athlete and the equipment for an event. Like, I don't like underbiking and I don't like overbiking. I like having the right bike that's going to be the fastest for the event. And I like having the training catered specifically to that event, so that you show up on race day and everything is optimized. And kind of the optimization of it, I don't know what it is about that, but it really, it's probably the most exciting thing for me. So from a coaching perspective, I get to do that with a lot of different races because different people are training for all sorts of different things, whether it be some bike packing race or like a, short track race. I mean, those are vastly different. And I can train those people specifically for them, which is cool. But just going back to the Schwamigan example, I've had to change my own training in order to get ready for it. I'm doing less volume and I'm doing more intensity, and I'm doing a lot more high intensity efforts that I wouldn't normally do, like VO2 max intervals and 30-30s and this sort of thing. I'm working on my sprint because I anticipate having to probably sprint someone at the end of the race to get some sort of placing. And then I'm also doing some things with my bike to try to see if I can have the most optimal bike for that race. I think what I may do, and I'm not 100% on this, I think what I may do is I may throw drop bars on my hardtail mountain bike and use that. And so just to give you a little insight as to why I would do that, I took and now I haven't ridden the course, so I could be talking out of my ass here, and that could be a terrible idea, and I'll see when I get there. But I took the average winning speed. If you put that into bikecalculator.com,
It's fast.
Yeah, it's like anywhere between 18 miles an hour and 20 miles an hour, depending on the year. And I anticipate that this year is going to be a fast year considering the competition. It'll probably be a 20 mile per hour year. I wouldn't be surprised if the winner breaks 2 hours and goes over 20. But if you take the average winning speed and then you put into bike calculator going at that speed in the standard mountain bike position with flat bars versus the drops, that's like a 40 to 50 watt difference that you have to put out. And and then I think hoods versus flat bars is like a 15 watt difference at that speed. So then if you break it down, how much time does that save you over the course of 40 miles? For the drops, it would save you, I think it was 13 minutes. And then for the hoods, it was like 4 minutes or something.
Wow. Are you sure you want me to release this episode before that race?
Yeah, I don't want any of my competition to know this, right? So I'm probably not going to post a single picture of this bike on Instagram. I'm hoping that none of the 30 lifetime riders are listening this deep into the podcast, but I don't know, maybe they will be.
Have you been hanging around Kerry Werner?
A little bit.
He likes to do these mountain bike races that are faster with the drop bars.
Yeah, he did that at Iceman.
Yep.
Last year.
Yeah.
Which I think Iceman would be a great course to do it on too.
Yeah, because the pace is high there as well.
Yeah.
If you were going to give advice to younger athletes that look up to you, what would it be?
So when I was young, I think that I put a lot of emphasis on the result that I would get at a race. And I almost feel like that's a bad mindset to have, because the second that you're not in a good position to get that result, it's like you kind of mentally give up. So for example, if I was anticipating that I would win a race and then I'm in the race and I'm in, I don't know, 5th place, which is still not bad, I wouldn't DNF the race, but I would kind of mentally give up. I'd be like, well, I'm not doing as well as I want to be doing. So why am I putting myself through this much pain?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do that. And there's a lot of things that can happen in racing that'll put you in a position that you didn't want to be in, whether it be flat tire or, you're cramping or whatever it is.
Yep.
We were talking about this earlier when we were talking about finishing races. So I think around 18 or so, I sort of had a mindset shift where instead of going into the race, putting a lot of emphasis on getting a good result, my emphasis more was just, I want to do as well as I possibly can. I want to finish the race knowing that I left everything out on the course. And a good race for me is not necessarily a race that I win, but a race where I look back at the race and I feel like there's nothing I could have done better. Like my pacing was perfect. I felt like I completely emptied the tank. I felt like my tactics were good, that sort of thing. So, and interestingly enough, I think when I adopted this mindset, I actually started racing better, and the results actually became better. So I think that that's probably what I would say to a young racer is it's easy to put a lot of emphasis on results, but I actually think that you'll have a better time and your results will end up being better if you have sort of this approach of, maybe it's more of a process approach, but just this approach of, I need to do as well as I possibly can during this race, and it doesn't matter what place I'm in. Just have this mentality of like, you cross that line and you feel like you left it all out there.
Do your best, leave it all out there, and be happy with that.
Yeah.
And I've used that the older I've gotten, because I was the same way. Always had to be about winning. Always had to be about winning. And if I didn't win, yeah, it wasn't good. So
yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we sign off?
It's been a fun podcast. We covered a lot of different topics. So had some good questions. I appreciate it.
Thanks. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah.
Where can people find you on the web if they want to connect with you? I mean, obviously on YouTube, so go find them on YouTube. It's Dylan Johnson.
My YouTube channel is just my name, Dylan Johnson. On Instagram, Dylan Johnson, but the Johnson is spelled JAWNSON instead of the normal way. Also on Strava, Dylan Johnson on Strava, if you want to look at what I'm specifically doing with my own training.
All these new social medias coming out, it just gives me a headache. I just want to have like 2 of them or 3 and be done.
Yeah, honestly, like YouTube and Instagram, if those were the only 2, I mean, I guess Facebook too, but yeah, if those were the only 3, that'd be fine with me.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And also, if people want to coach, where can people find you if they want to maybe hire you?
Yeah, send me an email at info@ignitioncoachco.com. My coaching load is actually full, but I've got coaches working for me that I can set you up with. I've got 13 different coaches ranging from cyclocross racers to track racers to roadies to mountain bikers. So we'll be able to set you up with somebody who knows what they're talking about in the discipline that you're looking to improve in.
So you know where to find him. Dylan, I love following your YouTube channel. I do learn new things there in regards to improving my own cycling and also getting information on things that confirms what I'm doing with my own athletes that I do coach. I look forward to following your journey. Look forward to your next YouTube video. I've had a lot of fun here going over all these questions with you today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
Hey, good luck in your next race. You have just listened to Unpacking the Athlete.